welcome to a very special and very different episode of A Book at Breakfast. We're live. We're recording this live. We're going to leave all the mistakes in. There's no plan. It's unscripted. It's improvised. It's all downhill from here. But you are listening to, and for the first time ever, watching A Book at Breakfast with me, Chris Newton, and Mark Charlesworth.
All right, said Susan. I'm not stupid. You're saying humans need fantasies to make life bearable? Really? As if it was some kind of pink pill? No. Humans need fantasy to be human, to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape. Two fairies, Hogfathers, little... Yes, there's practice. You have to start out learning to believe the little lies. So we can believe the big ones. Yes, justice, mercy, duty, that sort of thing. They're not the same at all. You think so? Then take the universe and grind it down to the finest powder and sieve it through the finest sieve, and then show me one atom of justice, one molecule of mercy. And yet, Death waved a hand, and yet you act as if there is some ideal order in the world, as if there is some rightness in the universe by which it may be judged. Yes, but people have got to believe that, or what's the point? My point exactly. She tried to assemble her thoughts. There is a place where two galaxies have been colliding for 1,000,000 years, said Death, apropos of nothing. Don't try to tell me that's right. Yes, but people don't think about that, said Susan. Somewhere there was a bed. Correct. Stars explode, worlds collide. There's hardly anywhere in the universe where humans can live without being frozen or fried. And yet you believe that a bed is a normal thing. It is the most amazing talent. Talent? Oh yes, a very special kind of stupidity. You think the whole universe is inside your heads. You make us sound mad, said Susan. A nice warm bed. No, you need to believe in things that aren't true. How else can they become? That was, of course, a reading from Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. We've got depicted down here as well.
Happy Hogs Watch.
So that's the book. What's the breakfast?
The breakfast, as you can see for the first time, is mushrooms on toast, which felt very appropriate. We almost considered having something from Nanny Ogg's cookbook, Banana Nana Nana Surprise, perhaps, but I couldn't get a copy of it in time. And I thought, what's a Hogs Watchy breakfast? And I thought, well, old boots with mud. So we considered old boots with mud, and then I remembered there's a wonderful collection of Terry Pratchett's non-fiction writing called A Slip of the Keyboard. And there's a really sweet article in there that he wrote years ago, possibly even in the 70s, about foraging for wild mushrooms. And I presume you foraged for these mushrooms. He just left the room, came back 20 minutes later with some mushrooms on toast, so I presume they were foraged.
I will forever hold my peace on that one.
Good.
But they are mushrooms. They're fried in Vitalite, a plant-based spread, with thyme and black pepper, and they're rather tasty, if you ask me.
It felt very right to be having mushrooms on toast, because we've had mushrooms on toast on A Book of Breakfast before, for one of our Lord of the Rings episodes. We did quite a few. And I know Pratchett was a huge Tolkien fan, so it kind of felt right that they should share some DNA. In fact, I think we were talking the other day about that Terry Pratchett, as a teenager, actually wrote to Tolkien to tell him how much he'd enjoyed Smith of Wootton Major, and Tolkien wrote back. And it's really sweet. You can read both those letters, actually, I think, on the Tolkien Wikipedia. There's actually a copy of the letter that you can read.
Is that a Tolkienopedia?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
There's a couple. Some people have their own wikis.
Yeah, presumably there's a Discworld one.
I would imagine so. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah.
It just deserves its own wiki.
Yeah. Just in case you're watching this because you follow Rogue Animal and you want to support the charity, which is fantastic. That's why we're here. On the off chance that you haven't read a Discworld book and know nothing about Discworld, the next half an hour or so is just going to be really alienating and confusing. No. What's remarkable about those books is that there are, I think, 41 of them in the series. And yet, you don't have to read them in order. Yeah, I've only read about half of them so far. I'm making my way through them, but you could pick up any one and automatically know what was going on and be up to speed with it. And
it's like Coronation Street in that respect.
yeah, I wonder how long it'd take you to get a Coronation Street reference in. Well, we've just got back from Media City, so but the Discworld is a fantasy universe. It's a flat Earth, and it's on the back of a giant space turtle. That's all you need to know, really. It's very similar to our world, and instead of Christmas,
apart from the giant space
turtle, instead of Christmas, they have something called Hogswatch, and instead of Father Christmas, they have the Hogfather. So this is a book about how to explain the auditors. There are these peculiar beings, almost like anthropomorphic personifications of bureaucracy, who don't like anything in the universe that doesn't make sense. And they think that Christmas doesn't make sense, or rather Hogswatch doesn't make sense, and the Hogfather and belief in the Hogfather doesn't make sense. So they hire an assassin to kill the Hogfather. And the way it's Mr. Tea Time, or Teatame, as he insists it's pronounced, the way he goes about this is ingenious. They sort of manage to transport themselves into a sort of realm of imagination where the Tooth Fairy keeps all the children's teeth that they've taken, and they're able to use old magic to control children through their teeth. It's all a bit blood magic from Doctor Who, isn't it? Blood control, rather, to stop children believing in the Hogfather. But the consequences are disastrous, or at least they would be disastrous if an unlikely hero didn't step in and save Hogswatch.
That unlikely hero is Death. So Death is a regular character throughout the Discworld series. Probably one of the best portrayals of Death in any kind of fiction. Death is a character that recurs throughout all sorts of books and TV series and films, and yet we've got an entirely human and relatable Death in Pratchett.
Yeah, a really lovable Death. He was doing it. There you go.
He doesn't look particularly lovable on that cover. But he starts effectively impersonating Father Christmas.
Yes.
Sorry, the Hogfather.
The Hogfather. And it's interesting because I remember first, it's a weird book. I think it's one of the best books ever written.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's very, very odd, even by the standards of this kind of absurdist satirical fantasy. On first read, I was trying to keep up with what was going on. What? Teeth? And assassins? And why is Death wearing a red suit with a jumper, a cushion stuffed up his jumper? And in a strange way, it's kind of slightly reminiscent of A Nightmare Before Christmas. They came out around the same time. Was this 95 or 96? You've got, this sort of this grim skeleton figure appearing in place of the traditional Father Christmas, and not quite understanding what Christmas is and how it works. But what's amazing about this book, and we talked about The Book Thief earlier in the year on our main podcast, and that's a novel which is famously narrated by Death, and it's really interesting to have this character's perception of humans and of humanity. Excuse me, can't edit that out. This is live. Live is evil backwards. And what was I saying about? Oh yeah, Death, observing humanity from a distance and not quite understanding it. But and I've always said, as bizarre as it sounds, there's something very Doctor Who-ish about Terry Pratchett's Death. This kind of eternal being that almost exists outside of time, who has these human companions, and is kind of endlessly fascinated and moved by them. And Death understands, more so than Susan, who he was talking to in the extract that you just read, how important it is to believe in Father Christmas. We might say Father Christmas when we mean the Hogfather, because in terms of like the themes being sort of universal and transferable to our world, the round world, as opposed to the Discworld.
I thought I was sat next to Father Christmas with this hat on.
Well, there's been an incident with an assassin, so I'm stepping in today. And
I
again,
considered putting a Christmas jumper on, but I'm incredibly hot.
we are
Just
sat in
for
front of the
radiator,
radiator,
so,
yeah. But
yeah.
I'm in it now.
I mean,
I'm committed.
I suppose my concession is this mug with bears on wearing scarves that my girlfriend bought me. So.
You drink out of that every day of the year, though.
I do, yeah. Every day is bear mug tea day
In
my
your heart.
Yes. I had a Christmas single when I was younger that I still play sometimes called Every Day is Christmas in My Heart. So.
And you resurrected it for was it last year, Home for Christmas
Home
Day?
for Christmas Day 2 years ago.
2 years. It's on my Christmas playlist.
Oh.
Well, thank you for the mushrooms. They're awesome.
It's an absolute pleasure. Doesn't the time just really lift them?
Yeah, we discussed that in our in the Lord of the Rings episode. We had
did we?
lemon and thyme. Lemon zest. It was amazing.
Yeah, I love lemon thyme. We used to grow that in our garden when I was with my mum, and it's a really unique flavour. Have you ever had lemon thyme just as an actual herb where it has that lemony scent?
No, I've had lemon and thyme flavoured rapeseed oil.
Ah, right.
From Wigan.
Okay. Interesting, right.
Where we currently are.
I did go on a walk last year, and I walked past a field that was absolutely aglow with rapeseed. You know, that kind of almost unnatural yellow light.
Yeah. I used to love getting a train sort of to Preston from Blackpool, like going by Kirkham and seeing all those yellow fields.
Yeah.
But the golden country.
Yeah.
I used to go to reading 1984 at the time. I've earmarked a really strange passage to read. I mean, the one that we started with was the obvious one, and in some ways, it isn't really spoilery out of context, is it? But it felt like, can we really read the end of the book? But it has to. That's that's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's the essence.
You wouldn't think to read this one, but I'm going to read this anyway. It wasn't even a bar. It was just a room where people drank while they waited for other people with whom they had business. That's it. I mean, there is more. This is the assassin, coming to meet some criminals that, they go to
assist him.
Assist him, yeah. But it really leapt out at me. I'm going to read that again. It wasn't even a bar. It was just a room where people drank. And what is a bar if it's not a room where people drink? And yet, it's clear. It's immediately clear what he means by that. It's just... And it says so much, and Pratchett's great with this, little subtle things like that. It says so much about how important words are to people, and how important imagination is. Like if a certain term or a certain word has a connotation, we believe in it and it makes it real. Yes. If everybody thinks a bar needs to be X, Y, Z, then if somebody opens one or builds one, they will make it have certain things. Funnily enough, I'm sat here with a Rover's Return tea towel.
Lift up the top as well, get the clouds in. Yeah.
But that's, that idea of a public house or a drinking den as a second home or somewhere. And I know that's a really, really weird section to pick, but I thought that's...
I'm not even sure if it counts as a section.
Well, all right. But the book's full of things like that. There's a bit about nursery as well, which I'll come to later. But that idea that we imbue things with significance and importance. And so when Susan, who's Death's granddaughter, but we don't need to explain why that is, she's human, more or less. She finds out that her grandfather, who is effectively the Grim Reaper, is climbing down chimneys and leaving presents and drinking sherry and eating... it's not mince pies, it's pork pies. For the Hogfather. And, she doesn't understand why he's doing it, why it's important. And his dire warning to her is that if the children don't believe in the Hogfather, if the Hogfather doesn't deliver presents to all the children on the Discworld, that then the sun will not rise in the morning. So I guess, spoiler alert if you haven't read the book. But I don't think you can really spoil Discworld novels, because so much of it is in the telling and the humour and the wit, and then that slow sort of sucker punch moment. You'll be reading something that seems quite fluffy and silly and gets a lot of laughs, and then you realise where it's going and the point he's making, and it's suddenly like you've had your soul ripped out.
And I suppose the method of delivering that in the narrative is by being quite evasive with the conversations that reveal things, and you kind of can't blame Susan for not understanding what her grandfather's doing, because he's constantly cryptic with her.
And then, when she says the spoilery bit, when she calls him up on it at the end, is that, but you said that the sun wouldn't rise, and he says, well, let's find his actual something about a celestial body would there we go, he says, again, all this riffling of pages that we can't edit out. The sun would have risen just the same. And he says, a mere ball of flaming gas would have illuminated the world. Which is, of course, the sun rising, but the idea that, the significance we give things just by naming them. And the sun doesn't rise. And it isn't the sun, it's only the sun because we call it the sun. And that idea... and I know this all, it kind of seems, a bar, who cares? But it's like the idea of the very first reading, the idea that we see we have a universe in our own heads that is not reality. Humans create things that don't really exist, and without
those significance upon random things that makes them more than the sum of their parts.
And without those things, we wouldn't be able to live. We'd go insane. And one of those on our main podcast. Our December episode is A Christmas Carol, and in that episode we talk about the fact that Christmas is a kind of human-made thing, that in some ways, religious aspects of it aside, as a holiday, we have Christmas cards with snowy scenery and robins and things that don't necessarily happen or even exist in certain parts of this country, but we believe in it, and that's what it is, and we kind of have to believe that. But sorry.
It's funny, when we were recording the Christmas Carol podcast, it was about a year in advance.
Yeah.
And I was speculating that we wouldn't have white Christmases anymore.
I know.
I'm looking outside
around.
The garden is frozen over and covered in ice, and there's a little carpet of autumn leaves that are all kind of glistening with the frost. So no, we shouldn't record things in advance. That's the message there. So we've skipped ahead a little bit because we normally talk about how we discovered the book. So what's your Hogfather origin story? I know I gave it to you. Well, I mean, there's a long answer and a short answer. The short answer is that you gave it to me. The long answer is that Terry Pratchett has kind of been on the fringes of my life for years. And I remember the Hogfather TV adaptation being on. And I remember being in Waterstones when I was probably about 13, 14. And every time a new Pratchett book came out, it seemed to kind of attract a degree of fanfare, and it seemed like a significant event.
So there was always a big poster on when you go over the bridge at Preston Station. There's always a massive poster when the latest one came out.
I mean, those posters at Preston Railway Station were often my introduction to a lot of different authors and books. But Pratchett was kind of always on the fringes of my world. And various friends, as I got older, told me about Terry Pratchett. One of them was Zoe, who we talked about before. I'm sure you'll talk more about. And another one was a gentleman I used to work with, who no doubt I will talk more about at some point, because he was a lovely, wonderful man who's sadly no longer with us. And he used to talk about Terry Pratchett with a kind of glint in his eye, and it really made me want to read Pratchett. And I wish that I'd read Pratchett when he was alive, because I only discovered Pratchett in the last couple of years. And reading it now is like having a conversation with him, and I so wish I could transport back in time and discuss the things that he was talking about with Terry Pratchett and kind of share the magic with him, because it gave me such an insight into his character and the wonderful soul that he was through discovering Pratchett later on. So there was always that kind of impetus to discover Pratchett, but it did take you actually giving me some of the books in order to actually make me think, okay, let's read this. So what was your introduction to it? Because I remember you were a little bit like me, and you knew of him, but we kind of hadn't explored it, and then all of a sudden we were walking up the steps to the railway station near where I used to live, and you were telling me you were doing Terry Pratchett, and I was intrigued, like, ooh, how do I gain entry to this world? Like, how do I get the keys to it?
Well, you get some teeth. I mean, I had the Truckers books when I was little. Where you could get those catalogues and you'd send off the books. My mum got me those. But other than that, I came to Pratchett sort of disgustingly late. I was in my 30s.
Almost as disgustingly late as me.
Yeah. Maybe you were fashionably late. I was just disgustingly late. And I remember this cover so well. I think my dad bought me this for Christmas, probably in the late 90s.
I love these garish covers.
Yeah,
as well.
for whatever reason, I didn't read it at the time. Although I did at our school library, you could rent videos from the school library.
At primary school or high school?
No, high school.
Oh, I remember that.
And they had the Weird Sisters cartoon. I remember renting that. I remember me and Mike Foster talking excitedly. About
yes, Mike Foster used to love
it.
Discworld.
Yeah.
Pratchett, didn't he?
But it wasn't there. So our friend Zoe, who we've talked about at length on the podcast, because she is the author of Jingle Hall, which was our October episode. Pratchett's her favourite author, and there is always that slight fear when somebody that you love and respect is really into something. There's that trepidation, and there's that, oh God, if I don't like it, then maybe we can't be friends. And fair enough, there are certain things that I like that if someone doesn't at least see the appeal, even then it's sorry.
I remember the Coronation Street Wilderness years, but I didn't watch it. We used to meet up, but we'd sit opposite each other in icy silence across pub tables.
Yeah, except none of that actually happened.
No, of course it didn't. No.
And I knew her favourite novel of all time was Good Omens. And I don't know, I think...
Point, actually.
Yeah, it was like 2016, I think she gave me a copy and just sort of insisted. I mean, and funnily enough, I don't know why, but my memory of reading Good Omens is reading it on the train to the station you were just talking about. So maybe I got off the train to tell you about, I don't know. But and I loved it. And that was also the first Neil Gaiman thing that I'd read, because that was it. Good Omens was co-written by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. But I had more of an idea of... We talked about Gaiman earlier in the year. We did an episode on The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Which, funnily enough, we've just been to see the stage show of.
Which was exceptional.
It was fantastic, yeah. But I, obviously being a huge Doctor Who fan, I was aware of the Doctor Who episodes that he'd written, so I kind of knew who he was. So that was my in, really. And what's interesting, even though Good Omens it exists in its own bubble, I mean, everybody knows Good Omens now because of the TV series, but the death in Good Omens is effectively, Discworld's death. It's the stylized, you can see it, his dialogue is all written in kind of lowercase, not lowercase, but, smaller capitals. And that idea that, that there's no, I love that, there's no speech marks around his speech, because his voice, well, he doesn't have vocal folds, he doesn't have lips, like his voice... He is an anthropomorphic personification. He's death, and he's this thing that he exists, across all time and at all points, and the idea that his voice just kind of is. It's a wonderful stylistic choice. But anyway, so I was that was my introduction to Pratchett's death, was the death and the other horsemen of the apocalypse in Good Omens.
And I kind of neglected to mention, actually, I read Good Omens because of Neil Gaiman several years before I kind of discovered Terry Pratchett, so I, probably should have mentioned that as well.
But then I went sort of head first in with most of the Witches books, and that was me. And then, so I still haven't read all of the Discworld books, but I own almost all of them now. And obviously I love the Witches books, but and I read Mort. And I had actually seen, do you remember, some people we used to know, we're going back about 10 years now, they had like an amateur theatre group. In fact, we were in one of their plays as victims of Sweeney Todd. Yeah. And they put on a production of Mort. I think actually there's a list of other titles, and there is it with Stephen Briggs. They've published, Mort, the play. So right. I presume, I didn't know this at the time, but I presume it was actually adapted from... the official script. So I had seen a play of Mort just in Lancaster at the Gregson, tiny little venue, and I loved it. And so once I'd read the Witches books and the Tiffany Aching books, I then went straight to the death. It's a weird one because you talk about the death books, but of course he's in pretty much all the other books anyway, because somebody always dies at some point. And there was just something that character is just such a fantastic character. And I'd read that he had letters from people in hospices, saying how comforting that character was. This kindly, benevolent death, and that idea that he doesn't kill anyone. He has this scythe, which I think is to separate the soul from the body, and he's strange because he's not responsible for anybody's death, and he doesn't. If he knows where we go when we die, he doesn't say. He just takes the souls away, and that's his job.
I've never read such a humane character as Death is in this.
Yeah.
It's incredible how somebody that is kind of a personification of an abstract concept and so ethereal embodies so many values and has such warmth.
And there's this question at the heart of the Hogfather. Hogfather, right? I keep calling it the Hogfather, it's just Hogfather. The question at the heart of Hogfather is, well, does the Hogfather exist? And you think, well, he's an anthropomorphic personification of Hogswatch. So if he's not real, then neither is Death.
Yeah.
Because Death is what is Death, and there are some wonderful touches at the way he describes, the place that Death lives, which is kind of outside of time, where everybody. There's a brilliant line. I can't remember if it's in this book or possibly Thief of Time. It says, they say everybody has a book in them, but in Death's house, everybody's in a book, and there are all these sort of quills scritching along. Yeah. And of course, everybody has a timer, an hourglass where the sand will eventually run out. But there's some, Death's sort of onyx libraries. He lives in like this sort of goth paradise, which is funny because he shouldn't, like as Susan often points out, he shouldn't have anything. He shouldn't have mirrors or bookshelves. He even has a comb, even though he doesn't have any hair. And this idea that he has them because they're things that people think he should have because he is Death.
Also, he kind of collects human ephemera because he's fascinated by them as well.
Even collected a whole human in the shape of Albert, sort of.
Yes, of course.
He has a sort of butler, I suppose, called Albert. But that's a long story. He's a character across the books. But that idea of like our innate need to believe in things that objectively aren't true, like justice or mercy, and yet that belief causes them to exist. And what's really interesting, because Death has an hourglass for everybody's life, and there's one in there for the Hogfather, which seems strange. How can a being like that ever die? And I think it shatters, doesn't it? And there's this idea that the Hogfather is kind of, he says he's not dead because he can't die, because he's basically a god. He's like, in kind of human round world terms, he's the Yule Father. He's this ancient, almost spirit. He said he's not dead, but he's sort of gone. And that idea that they have to bring him back. And there's a wonderful scene where, because of what Death has done, has filled, he's been seconded. Learned what that word meant earlier today, so now I can use it proudly. And
that was the education at breakfast, a dictionary at breakfast.
Yeah, I don't recommend that episode.
Whenever me and Chris have breakfast together, we always get a dictionary out and learn new words. Again, possibly being a little bit liberal with the truth.
When I agreed to a book at breakfast, I thought it would be something better than that. But there you go. And this figure appears in the snow at the end. Again, spoilers. And he's kind of like a primitive human. Although not quite human, because it's Hogfather and he has tusks. I'm not sure what the Hogfather is. But and at one point he's kind of sort of tattooed or within a sort of Pictish kind of way. But then he becomes kind of more humanoid until he is like the jolly red-suited figure. And that's a wonderful little nod to the sort of, the red Santa, the Coca-Colaization, and where Susan says... he wasn't originally red. People just, I can't remember how she words it, but like, marketing companies just decided he should wear red, and Death says no, they remembered. I love that idea that some things just are. They're in our collective consciousness, like culturally and historically and folklorically, and that these things matter. And so basically, it's sort of everybody's belief in the Hogfather causes him to come back. And he is there. He is really there on the sleigh with the pigs. Instead of reindeers, he has pigs. So is it Gouger and presumably Trotter? I can't remember.
I feel like Russell T Davies kind of borrowed the same idea in Doctor Who, in the Is it the Sound of Drums or Last of the Time Lords, where the Doctor is kind of shrunk by the Master?
Yeah.
It's people's belief in the Doctor that brings him back.
Yeah, because Martha goes around the world telling everyone about him. Yeah.
Belief is a powerful thing.
Yes.
A powerful concept. And I suppose, well, this book touches on it. So much of our society and things that we hold very dear are forged almost entirely on belief or faith. As you might call it.
And that idea of it being children who believe in it. You think what's more important that children believe in Hogfather? Because there are quite a few. Oh, let's find one now. There are letters from kids.
Yeah.
Oh, here's one. If it's the right one, and it's even done. I love the sort of childish handwriting of it. Here we go. You know what, I'm going to read the whole letter because it's really lovely. It's spelt wrong. It's great. Dear Hogfather, D-E-R-E, Hogfather. For Hog's Watch, I would like a drum and a dolly and a teddy bear and a ghastly Omnian Inquisition torture chamber with wind-up rack and nearly real blood, B-L-U-D. You can use again and get it from the toy shoppy in Short Street. It is $5.99. I have been good, and here is a glass of G-L-A-R-S, glass of sherry, and a pork pie for you and turnips for Gouger, and Tusker and Rooter and Snouter. I hop the chimney is big enough, but my friend William says you are father, really. Even the kids say, no, I don't. I think it's just a man in a suit. And so what's more important, the children believing in the Hogfather, or the adults believing that the children believe in the Hogfather? And because there's if anyone's interested in philosophy, you'll recognise this as something Pascal's wager, as sort of thinking about the belief in God and the idea that it's best to hedge your bets, because like you should believe in God, because if there is a God, then you're all right and you'll get into heaven, and if there isn't a God, you've not lost anything. And Pratchett kind of lampoons this here. He says there's a very a suggestion put forward by Quirmian philosopher who said, possibly the gods exist and possibly they do not. So why not believe in them in any case? If it's all true, you'll go to a lovely place when you die. And if it isn't, then you've lost nothing, right? When he died, he woke up in a circle of gods holding nasty looking sticks. And one of them said, we're going to show you what we think of Mr. Clever Dick in these parts. And, you know, he's being silly, but it's exactly what you said about faith. Like, just acting like you believe in something is not the same as believing in it. And that idea, like, is it for the adults, really? And this is going to be as scintillating as when I started talking about the word bar. But there was one, I convinced myself, look, we had mushrooms on toast, so I've got to do this. So I convinced myself that this was a Tolkien reference, although it might just be a random bit of the book. Death, pillow slipping gently under his red robe, stood in the middle of the nursery carpet. It was an old one. Things ended up in the nursery when they had seen a complete tour of duty in the rest of the house. Long ago, someone made it by carefully knotting bits of brightly coloured rag, blah, 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 blah. It seems kind of inconsequential, and maybe it is.
I'm waiting for the Tolkien reference.
Well, I think you should know this, because you studied it on fairy stories. I'm pretty sure it's on fairy stories. Tolkien compares fairy tales to nursery furniture.
Oh, right,
and he said
okay.
It's not furniture that was specifically made for children. It's just furniture that the adults aren't using anymore, so they've bunged it in the nursery. Yeah. And he said that was what we culturally had done with fairy stories, because they weren't written for children. They were tales that people told, but we kind of relegated them to being just stuff and nonsense for kids. And I thought, given what a big Tolkien fan Pratchett was, and given that this book is all about kind of that childish need, the importance of that childish need to believe in fantasy, I thought, I'm convinced that is a reference to fairy stories.
It sounds credible.
Yeah.
You've got me. Maybe you don't have everybody else. But not everything is about Tolkien, but 99% of it is.
But even if that's not the case, I still like the idea that it's kind of, it's not like, the children's souls are at stake. It's like, it's humanity. We need and in a strange way, with the Hogfather sort of, I was going to say coming back to life at the end, but he doesn't so much as come back to life as kind of just become once more. He's almost like he's just spontaneously manifest into being.
Like Gandalf the White.
Yeah, or I suppose it's a bit like.
Sorry, I'm making it about Tolkien.
Yeah, I know
your job.
Well, you've gone down that rabbit hole. Next year, if you can imagine such a time, we'll be talking about the letters from Father Christmas on our main podcast, and
Lord knows what we'll say.
And the children ask how old Father Christmas is, and whatever year it is, he gives that as his date. I am 1,927 years old, because of course he is as old as the birth of Christ.
Yeah.
Therefore, he is as old as Christmas. And we were saying, was he born then, or did he just he just spontaneously popped into existence as an old man with a beard and a sack full of gifts because that's what we believe. And so nursery furniture, the power of belief, and that idea that it's for adults, or maybe not, but. And I just love that.
Well, I still believe in Father
Yeah,
Christmas,
well, exactly. But you have to, if you didn't believe in Father Christmas, he wouldn't be real. And in a strange way, or rather, you wouldn't get any presents. And you can't just write a letter and say, "I know you're really Father," because and again, that's the thing. Like, death is really insistent on taking the bite of the pie and leaving the sooty footprints. Like, they have to know that we were here, because then they will believe. And it reminds me of, traditionally in pantomimes, there'll be the midway point where Tinkerbell or whoever just begins to die. And I always thought that was silly when I was a kid. And, the audience would have to say that they believed in fairies, and then she would come back to life. Do you remember? It was mandatory. It was a certain midway point in the pantomime.
That makes it sound like we held a contract over the theatre.
But I actually, in hindsight, I thought, because if you believe in fairies, then fairies exist. That's the magic.
Absolutely.
And sorry,
there's a little spot in the woods near here where people have created all these doors to fairyland, and they've painted all these different themed doors. And hung up little things for the fairies. So, I believe in fairies because I've got some living locally.
And it's a bit like we mentioned, we've just been to see the stage play of Ocean at the End of the Lane, and there's a wonderful bit in both the book and the play about the fairy ring in the garden, and there are these creatures who are out to get the boy in it, and he's told to wait in the fairy ring, don't leave the circle, the classic thing. And he said, but it's not a real fairy ring, that's just what we call it. Then Letty Hempstock, who's the kind of witch, says, it is what it is. I love that. I think that's possibly my favourite moment in the whole play, and he's illuminated on the stage. Sorry, we're talking about Neil Gaiman now, but they feel sort of intrinsically linked. And again, back to that idea of believing that something has magic can imbue it with significance, and therefore it is magic. Headology, as Granny Weatherwax, who sadly isn't in this Discworld book, would have called it. But so did you say you'd seen the TV series?
No, I haven't. No, I need to watch the TV series.
It's a strange one. Discworld, I really enjoyed the cartoons they did, but I wonder if it's kind of somehow fundamentally unfilmable, because so much of it is in the narrative voice. And yet, I was reading recently that apparently Pratchett kind of felt kind of slighted, like, well, they've done Lord of the Rings films, they've done Harry Potter films, and he'd been told by, your stuff is too lofty, it's too out there, and he thought that was nonsense and wasn't very happy. So I knew that there was a Hogfather. I remember when it came out, I remember seeing a thing in Radio Times about it, and I thought Death looked really cool, but I remember thinking it probably won't be any good. And it was in that kind of mid to late noughties spate of Lord of the Rings had finished, as in Peter Jackson's trilogy, and everyone was trying to make fantasy stuff. There was they made the Golden Compass, but then they never got around to making the second one. And what else did they do around that time? Like, well, the Spooks Apprentice film that was in development hell forever.
A series of unfortunate events.
Yeah, there were all sorts of fantasy. Oh, the Narnia films. I don't know if they ever finished those, and nothing quite landed. And so I unfairly kind of lumped it in with those. And it wasn't until Zoe, who is, my kind of barometer for these things, told me that she loved it and they watch it every Christmas. So only a couple of years ago I finally gave it a go, and it's pretty good. It's very, very faithful. It's one of those classic adaptations where like they've just put all the dialogue from the book in the script and said, wouldn't it be great if we just had characters doing and saying what it says in the book?
You'll have to tell me after this if it's on any streaming services, because we probably shouldn't be name dropping any big
I don't
organisations.
think it is.
Right.
You have to buy the DVD.
I've
DVD.
already name dropped Vitalite, so
Oh
apologies
my god!
for that.
Oh my god!
We should be brand free.
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
BBC,
We can't
but-
bleep it out. Oh my god! We've got. You can't see. There's a massive list on the wall of things that we're not allowed to say.
Why is John Major on there?
Well, what they don't know is that every episode we just devolve into a 45-minute rant about John Major and then have to painstakingly edit it out.
Why do we do it? Why do we make a rod for our own backs?
But in case you've never heard A Book at Breakfast before, it's a podcast we started at the beginning of this year. We started our first episode was in January. We covered The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, aged 13 3/4.
You mean that one there?
Yeah, we've actually got a copy of the book. Sometimes, I'm reading on the go. I like to take a nice compact travel size book with me, so it doesn't weigh too much. Look at that. That's my Christmas present from Mark.
I mean, it's not your only Christmas present, I should hasten to add, but...
Yeah, he got me a load of other books that are all the same size.
And a load of magnifying glasses as well.
And you know who Sue Townsend said she saw on television and thought, that's what Adrian Mole looks like?
Oh, come on.
John Major.
Oh, interesting.
No,
Right.
the list.
It is relevant.
It's
Are we going
bloody relevant.
to descend into the rant now?
Yeah, I know. Right, spool forward 45 minutes. No, so
And that's why I'm never talking about politics from 1993 again.
Every month this year we've done a different episode, completely different every time. I mean, I say completely different every time. Mostly we just talk about Doctor Who, but ostensibly we talk about a different book each month. Our current episode is on A Christmas Carol, and as a sort of a bonus Christmas episode, we released. Normally at the end of an episode, we'll talk about adaptations, thumbs up or thumbs down, but. The Muppet Christmas Carol is the ultimate adaptation.
The definitive reading of the text.
And we couldn't squash that into 10 minutes. So we gave it its own episode. We recorded a commentary track. So if you're a glutton for punishment, you can listen to all 12 episodes of A Book at Breakfast and then listen to our commentary track for The Muppet Christmas Carol.
And if you want to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram.com. But maybe I'll leave
not
that.
Instagram.com.
Maybe I'll leave
it's
that
an
to
app.
you.
It's like an app that you don't know. Yeah, you can follow us at Book at Breakfast on Instagram and Twitter. And we're on wherever you get your podcasts. We're even on Audible now.
Yes, we
that's like
are,
the 21st century
It's
equivalent
magical.
of like being in a bookshop. But yeah, we've got. If you go to the website and our Instagram, there's links to everything that you might need to listen to more of this nonsense and to follow us. And hopefully, in the future, we'll be doing more Discworld books and certainly more Pratchett, definitely more Neil Gaiman. But small spoilers, yeah. So we've just finished our first series, but we are doing another series. It's going to start on Valentine's Day, and predictably, we'll be covering
The Growing Pains of
The
Adrian
Growing Pains of
Mole,
Adrian
the
Mole,
sequel
yeah.
to The Secret Diary of
We've got to
Adrian Mole.
start.
Sue
Adrian
Townsend
Mole.
is our kind of shining light.
She is, yeah.
She's our guiding star.
Yeah. Well, thank you to Michael and Joe at Rogue Animal for giving us the opportunity to do.
Thank you.
Is this an episode of A Book at Breakfast? This is exclusive. We're not going to put this on the main feed. This is just for you kind people supporting this event and supporting Fanconi Hope. So thank you for watching. Enjoy everything else they've got lined up for you. And have a wonderful, happy Hogs Watch.
Have yourself a merry little Hogs Watch. Merry Christmas.